The first thing I remember is the sound of laughter coming from my living room. It wasn't soft laughter. It wasn't familiar laughter. It was loud, careless, and confident, the kind of laughter that belongs to people who feel completely at home. The kind of laughter that assumes the space already belongs to them. I was standing in my small kitchen, holding a dish towel in my hands, frozen in place. I had just come back from the market. My shoes were still on. My bag was still hanging from my arm. I hadn't even set my keys down yet, and yet, when I opened my front door, I stepped into noise, voices, music playing from my speaker, plates clinking. Someone had moved my coffee table. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had walked into the wrong house. I stood there, blinking, my heart beating fast, my mind trying to understand what my eyes were seeing. There were strangers sitting on my couch. A woman I had never seen before was standing near my window, holding a glass from my cabinet. Two men were laughing near the dining table. Shoes were scattered near the door. My home smelled like perfume and food that wasn't mine. Then I heard my son's voice. "Mom, you're back already?" He said it casually, cheerfully, as if nothing was wrong. As if this was normal. I slowly put my bag down on the floor. My hands were shaking, but I kept my face calm. I didn't want to embarrass him. I didn't want to embarrass myself. I looked around again. There were 8 people. In my house. People I didn't know. People I had not invited. People who were laughing and eating and touching my things. I asked him quietly, "What is going on?" He smiled, the same smile he used when he was younger and wanted to avoid trouble. "I invited some friends over," he said. "I hope that's okay." He said it like it was already done. Like my answer no longer mattered. I looked at the table. Plates from my cupboard. My good plates. The ones I only used on holidays. Someone had spilled sauce on the tablecloth I had kept wrapped in plastic for years. I felt something tighten in my chest. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. He shrugged. "I didn't think it was a big deal." That sentence stayed with me. I didn't think it was a big deal. I looked at him, standing there so comfortably in my space, surrounded by people who felt entitled to my home, my food, my time, and in that moment, I realized something painful. This wasn't about guests. This was about respect. I took a deep breath and nodded. "It's fine," I said softly. His shoulders relaxed. He turned back to his friends, already done with the conversation. I walked into the kitchen. I told myself to calm down. I told myself not to make a scene. I told myself I was being sensitive. After all, he was my son. But as I stood there, looking at the sink, already filled with dishes I hadn't used, I felt invisible. No one had asked me. No one had warned me. No one had thought about how I might feel coming home to this. I opened the fridge. Inside were the groceries I had bought for the week. Simple things, vegetables, leftovers, ingredients I planned to use slowly, carefully, because money doesn't stretch the way it used to. I remembered the electricity bill sitting unpaid on the counter, the rent due next week, the way I calculate every expense in my head before spending. And now there were 8 extra mouths in my house. I heard one of the guests call out, "Is there more food?" My son answered, "Yeah, check the kitchen. Check the kitchen." As if it wasn't my kitchen. I closed the fridge door and leaned against it for a second. I felt tired, not just physically, emotionally tired. This wasn't the first time my son had done something like this, but it was the first time I felt something shift inside me. I walked back into the living room. One of the women smiled at me. "Your house is lovely," she said. I forced a smile back. "Thank you," I replied. Someone turned the music up louder. Someone else laughed again. I watched as my son moved easily among them, confident, relaxed, proud even. I saw the way he spoke, the way he took up space, and suddenly, memories came rushing back. Years of quiet sacrifices. Years of shrinking myself. Years of saying yes when I wanted to say no. I remembered the nights I stayed awake worrying about him. The jobs I turned down because the hours didn't work. The clothes I didn't buy so he could have what he needed. I remembered how I had told myself, over and over, that this was what love looked like. But standing there, surrounded by strangers in my own home, I felt something close to anger. Not loud anger, the quiet kind, the kind that settles deep and stays. I went back into the kitchen. I picked up the dish towel again and folded it, slowly, carefully. Then I began to prepare something else. Not food, not yet. I prepared myself. I told myself to breathe, to think clearly, to not react out of emotion, because this moment wasn't just about tonight. It was about a pattern. It was about boundaries that had never been set, lines that had always been crossed, and I realized something else. If I didn't do something now, this would keep happening. I looked at the clock. They planned to stay a while. I could hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, the music. I could also hear my own thoughts, louder than they had been in years. This is my house. I paid for this space with years of work, worry, and patience, and for the first time in a long time, I decided I wasn't going to stay silent. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to do something calm, something deliberate, something that would finally be heard. I took a deep breath, washed my hands, and turned off the stove I had left on earlier. Then I stepped back into the living room. My son looked at me, smiling unaware. "Mom, everyone's having a great time," he said. I nodded. "Yes," I replied quietly. "I can see that." I looked around the room once more, at the strangers, at my moved furniture, at the life that seemed to belong to everyone except me, and inside my chest, a decision settled. They had come expecting one thing, but what I was about to do would change everything. I woke up the next morning with a strange heaviness in my body, not the kind that comes from not sleeping enough. This was deeper, like something had finally landed after years of floating around inside me. The house was quiet, too quiet. The guests were gone, the laughter was gone, the music was gone, but the feeling they left behind was still everywhere. I walked into the living room slowly. My coffee table was still pushed to the side. There were faint rings on the wood where glasses had been placed without coasters. One cushion was on the floor. Another smelled like someone else's perfume. I stood there for a long moment, just looking. This house used to feel small but safe, predictable, mine. Now it felt borrowed. I picked up the cushion and placed it back carefully, like I always do. I wiped the table, even though I knew the marks would stay. I collected empty cups from places I wouldn't normally find them. As I cleaned, my mind kept going back, not just to last night, but to years before it, because what happened last night didn't start last night. It started a long time ago. When my son was born, I was young, younger than I should have been, maybe. I didn't know much about life, but I knew one thing very clearly. I would protect him. His father left when he was still small, not in a dramatic way. No shouting, no big goodbye, just a slow disappearance. Less money, fewer visits, then none at all. So it became just the two of us. I worked wherever I could, offices, shops, cleaning houses when things were tight. I learned how to stretch meals, how to fix things instead of replacing them, how to smile when I was tired. I learned how to say it's okay even when it wasn't. My son grew up watching me do everything. I made his lunches, helped with homework, attended school meetings, stayed up late sewing torn clothes or packing for trips I couldn't afford but didn't want him to miss. I didn't complain. I told myself this was normal. This was motherhood. When he wanted friends over as a child, he always asked. He would stand in the doorway, hesitant, waiting for my answer. I would say yes most of the time, even when I was exhausted. I liked hearing his laughter then. It made the house feel alive, but somewhere along the way, asking turned into assuming. I didn't notice when it happened. Or maybe I did, but I ignored it. When he was in college, he started coming home later. He would bring friends without warning. "We'll just be in my room," he'd say. Then they'd end up in the kitchen, in the living room, eating, using things. I would tell myself he's young. It's temporary. When he started working, the pattern didn't stop. He still lived with me. Said he was saving money. Said he'd move out soon. Soon became years. I adjusted my life around his. I ate later, slept lighter, kept the house ready for unexpected noise, and slowly, without meaning to, I stopped thinking of the house as mine alone. I cleaned the kitchen again that morning. I washed every dish by hand, even the ones I didn't use. The water ran hot over my fingers, and I didn't pull away when it started to sting. I needed to feel something real. My son woke up around noon. I heard his door open, his footsteps heavy, relaxed. "Morning," he said, grabbing a glass from the cupboard. I looked at him. He looked comfortable, safe, at home. I wondered when he had stopped seeing me the same way. "Did everyone leave okay?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He nodded and drank his water. "Thanks for last night," he said casually. "They really like the place." I felt a small twist in my chest. I wanted to ask, what about me? But instead, I said nothing. He went back to his room, already lost in his phone. The rest of the day passed quietly. Too quietly. I went about my routine. Laundry, bills, cooking something simple. As I folded clothes, I remembered times when he was younger. When he would run to me after school, telling me every detail of his day. When he would ask me before touching anything, "When did that boy disappear?" In the evening, I sat down at the small kitchen table with my tea. The unpaid bills were still there. The numbers hadn't changed. I stared at them and felt the familiar worry rise. Everything I owned was in this house. Everything I had worked for, and yet, I felt like a guest in my own space. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the scene in my head. The laughter, the shrug. I didn't think it was a big deal. That sentence echoed louder the more I thought about it, because it wasn't just about guests. It was about how easy it had become for him to take without asking. The next few days followed the same pattern. He came and went, used the kitchen, left messes, made plans without telling me. Once, he mentioned having people over again, casually, as if testing the ground. I looked up from what I was doing. "When?" I asked. "Maybe this weekend," he said. He didn't ask if it was okay. Something inside me tightened again. "I'll be busy," I said simply. He looked surprised. "Busy with what?" "With my own plans," I replied. He frowned slightly but said nothing. I could tell he wasn't used to hearing that. I started paying closer attention after that, not in an angry way. In a clear way. I noticed how often he assumed, how rarely he checked in, how the house revolved around his comfort. I noticed how small I had made myself to avoid conflict. One afternoon, I opened an old drawer while looking for documents. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in years, old receipts, letters, the house deed. I sat on the floor and went through them slowly. This house wasn't gifted to me. It wasn't luck. It was years of saving, years of saying no to myself, years of choosing responsibility over ease. I remembered signing those papers with shaking hands, proud and terrified at the same time. This was my name on them, mine. That realization stayed with me. A few days later, my sister called. We talked about small things at first. Then she asked how things were going at home. I hesitated. "Fine," I said automatically. Then I stopped. "No," I corrected myself. "Not fine, just familiar." She was quiet for a moment. "You sound tired," she said. I smiled sadly. "I am." I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. She listened without interrupting. At the end, she said something simple. "You know, love doesn't mean disappearing." That sentence stayed with me too. That evening, my son came home excited. He talked about work, about friends, about plans. He mentioned another gathering. "Bigger this time. We'll need more food," he said. "But I'll chip in." I looked at him. "Did you already invite them?" I asked. He paused. Just for a second. "Yes," he admitted. There it was again, the assumption. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. He smiled, relieved, but inside, I was making a different kind of list. Not groceries, boundaries. I started preparing in quiet ways. I reviewed my finances. I gathered documents. I thought about conversations I had avoided for years, not to punish him, but to finally include myself. The house felt different now. Not hostile, just honest. Each time I walked through the rooms, I reminded myself why I was here, what this place represented. This wasn't about control. It was about dignity. And as the weekend approached, and I heard him talking excitedly on the phone, inviting people again, like it was a given, I felt calm in a way I hadn't before, because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. The weekend arrived faster than I expected. By Friday evening, the house already felt tense, like it was holding its breath. My son moved through the rooms with energy, checking things, making calls, laughing into his phone. I watched quietly. He didn't notice how often he took up space, how his voice filled the rooms, how he talked about plans as if the house was an extension of himself. "This time it'll be even better," he said while standing in the kitchen. "More people. They're really excited." I nodded while stirring a pot on the stove. "How many?" I asked. "Not sure," he replied quickly. "Maybe 10. Or more." My hand slowed. "And where will everyone sit?" I asked. He shrugged. "We'll figure it out." That answer said everything. Over the years, I had learned to stop pushing. When I pushed, he got distant. When I stayed quiet, things stayed peaceful. But peaceful didn't mean fair. That night, I lay awake again. Not anxious this time, just aware. I noticed how my thoughts weren't racing anymore. They were clear, calm, heavy but steady. I thought about how often I had adjusted my needs to keep him comfortable. How I had avoided saying no because I didn't want to seem unkind, or old, or difficult. I had taught him that silence meant agreement. The next morning, he left early to meet friends. He didn't mention shopping, cleaning, or preparation. So I did something different. I didn't rush to clean. I didn't plan a menu. I didn't move furniture. I went about my day as if nothing special was happening. I made breakfast for myself only. I ate slowly. I read. I washed just my dishes. The house stayed as it was. Around noon, he came back carrying bags. "Can you help me with something?" he asked, already heading to the counter. I looked at the bags, chips, drinks, things I don't usually buy. "What do you need?" I asked. "Just some help setting things up," he said. "You know how you always do it best." That sentence felt like a small hook. Always, I smiled lightly. "I have my own plans today." He stopped and looked at me. Really looked this time. "Plans?" he repeated. "Yes." He frowned. "Since when?" I shrugged. "Since I decided." He laughed awkwardly. "Come on. It's just for a few hours." I met his eyes. "This is my home," I said gently. "And I didn't agree to host." His face changed. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion. I thought he started. "I know." I interrupted softly. "You didn't think it was a big deal." Silence settled between us. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around the kitchen like it might help him find the right words. "Well," he said finally, "they're already coming." "I understand," I replied, "but I won't be preparing." He stared at me. "You're serious?" "Yes." For a moment, I thought he might raise his voice, or accuse me of something, or make me feel guilty. Instead, he sighed. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll handle it." And just like that, he walked away. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I stayed in my room for a while, listening to the sounds of the house. Cabinets opening, doors closing harder than necessary, phone calls. I didn't feel scared. I felt sad, because it was clear now how much he relied on me without realizing it. How invisible my effort had become. By evening, people started arriving. I heard voices at the door, laughter, shoes being kicked off. I stayed where I was. And no one knocked on my door. No one asked if I was joining. I could hear him explaining things, making excuses. "She's busy. She's tired. She'll come out later." I didn't. I sat on my bed, holding an old photo album, one I hadn't opened in years. Pictures of him as a child, birthday cakes I baked after long workdays, school events I attended alone, smiles he gave freely back. Then, I wondered when gratitude turned into expectation. At some point, the noise grew louder. Music started playing. The floor vibrated slightly with footsteps. The house felt unfamiliar again. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt separate. After about an hour, there was a knock on my door. "Mom?" His voice came through, strained. "Yes? Can we talk?" I opened the door. He stood there looking tired. Not angry, just overwhelmed. "This is awkward," he said. "They're asking where you are." "I'm here," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "They expected. Usually I know," I said calmly. He exhaled. "Why are you doing this?" I didn't answer right away. "I'm not doing anything," I said finally. "I'm just not doing everything." He looked at me, clearly unsure how to respond. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said. "I just thought this was home." "It is," I agreed. "But it's my home too." He shifted his weight. "You never said there was a problem," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That's part of it." We stood there in silence again. "I'll manage tonight," he said eventually. "But this feels unfair." I nodded. "It might. At first." He left without another word. I closed the door and sat down. My heart was beating faster now, but not with fear, with release. Later that night, after the guests left, the house was messy, louder than usual, even in its quiet. I stepped into the kitchen, empty bottles, crumbs, spills. My son was standing there alone, staring at the mess. He looked at me as I entered. "I didn't realize how much work this is," he admitted. I said nothing. "I cleaned some," he added quickly. "But it's a lot." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "It is." He leaned against the counter. "You could have helped," he said, not accusing, just tired. "I could have," I agreed. But you didn't ask. He was quiet for a long moment. I guess I stopped asking. A long time ago, he said. That was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from him in years. I don't want to fight, he continued. I just don't want things to change like this. I looked at him. They already have, I said softly. I'm just catching up. He didn't respond. That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept deeply, not because things were resolved, but because I had stopped pretending, and as I drifted off, I knew this tension wasn't finished. It was only beginning to surface. The next few days passed with a strange quiet, not the peaceful kind. The kind where words sit heavy in the air, but no one picks them up. My son moved around the house differently now, slower, more careful, like someone learning the shape of a room they thought they already knew. He cleaned more than usual, not well, just enough to show effort. I noticed, but I didn't comment. I had learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than correction. On Wednesday morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. It was plain. No writing on the front. Inside were printed pages. At first, I thought it was mail he had accidentally opened. But when I looked closer, I saw my name typed clearly at the top. Documents, utility bills, property tax papers, insurance statements, all addressed to me, all paid by me, all for this house. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through them. The bottom of the stack was something else, a photocopy of the house deed. My name was the only one on it. I sat down slowly, not because I was shocked, because suddenly, I understood. He hadn't brought guests into our house because he was careless. He had done it because, somewhere along the way, he had started to believe the house belonged to him, and I had allowed that belief to grow. There was another paper at the very back, folded once, a note. I recognized his handwriting immediately. I didn't know if you remembered this stuff. I thought maybe it would help clear things. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just confusion. I held the papers in my lap for a long time. Then I stood up and placed them back in the envelope. When he came home that evening, I was already waiting in the living room. He stopped when he saw me sitting there. What's wrong? He asked. Sit down, I said. He hesitated, then sat across from me. I placed the envelope on the table between us. He looked at it. His jaw tightened slightly. I found this, I said. I know, he replied. I left it there. Why? He leaned back, crossing his arms. I guess I realized I never really thought about who handles all this, he said. The bills, the house, and, I asked, and I figured, since we live here, it was shared. I nodded slowly. Did you ever ask? I said. He looked away. No, did you ever check? No, the room felt small. I didn't mean to disrespect you, he said. I just didn't see it that way. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't see me at all. He flinched slightly at that. That's not true, he said. You know I appreciate you. Appreciation isn't silence, I said calmly. And it is an assumption. He rubbed his face. So what is this? He asked. A lecture? No, I said. It's a boundary. He laughed quietly. Now, yes, I replied. Now. He leaned forward. So what changes? I took a breath. If you want to invite people into this house, I said. You ask. He nodded slowly. If you want help, I continued. You ask. Another nod. And if you want this house to feel like a shared space, I finished. You respect that it is mine. Silence. Then he said something I didn't expect. I think I forgot you were more than just here, he admitted. That hurt more than anger would have. I raised you, I said softly. Not the house. He swallowed. I don't want to lose this, he said. Us. You won't, I replied. But things will be different, he nodded, not fully understanding yet, but listening. That weekend, something happened that confirmed everything. He asked, Mom, he said Saturday morning, is it okay if a friend comes by for coffee? Just one. No bags. No crowd. I looked at him. Yes, I said. He smiled. A real one, small, relieved. The visit was short, quiet, respectful. When the friend left, my son cleaned up without being asked. Later that evening, he sat beside me on the couch. I didn't realize how much I was taking, he said. I thought, because you never complained. I know, I said. I taught you that. He looked at me. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift. not power, balance. The house didn't change overnight. The walls were the same. The furniture stayed where it had always been. The quiet still came in the evenings, just like before, but something inside the house had shifted, and something inside me had settled. The days after that conversation felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because things were finally clear. My son started asking before assuming. Not every time, not perfectly, but enough that I noticed. He would pause in the doorway and say, "Is this okay?" Or, "Do you mind if I?" And every time he did, I felt something soften in my chest, not pride, relief. One evening, a few weeks later, he came home carrying groceries. "For dinner," he said, holding up the bag. I thought I'd cook tonight. I watched him move around the kitchen, clumsy and unsure, reading instructions on his phone, making small mistakes. I didn't correct him. I let him struggle a little. When we finally sat down to eat, the food wasn't great. Too salty, overcooked, but I ate every bite. "This is harder than it looks," he admitted, laughing softly. "Yes," I said. "It is." He didn't complain. After dinner, he washed the dishes without being asked. I went to my room and sat quietly, listening to the sound of running water and clinking plates. For years, those sounds had meant work waiting for me. Now, they meant something else. Time passed. Not dramatically, just steadily. And with time came small moments that mattered, more than big speeches ever could. One afternoon, he asked if he could repaint his room. "Only your room," I said. "And you clean up after. Deal?" he replied. Another time, he mentioned maybe moving out someday, not angrily, not defensively, just as a thought. "I think I should learn how to live on my own," he said. My heart tightened for a second, then relaxed. "That's part of growing," I said. He nodded. "I don't want to rush it," he added. "But I don't want to stay here forever either." I appreciated that honesty. There was no guilt in it and no pressure, just truth. The real change, though, came quietly one night. I was sitting in the living room, reading, when he came in and sat across from me. He looked nervous. "I've been thinking about that night," he said. "When I invited everyone over, I closed my book. I keep replaying it," he continued. "And I realized something. I waited. I wasn't just using the house," he said. "I was using you." He looked down, for comfort, for safety, for things I didn't want to handle. I didn't interrupt. "And when you didn't step in," he said, "I felt exposed. Like I didn't know how to stand on my own. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I kept my voice steady." "That's not a failure," I said. "That's learning." He looked up. "I don't want to learn at your expense anymore," he said. That was the moment, not the confrontation, not the documents, not the guess. That sentence. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Thank you," I said. We sat like that for a while. No need to fill the silence. Months later, things looked very different from the outside. People would still say, "You're lucky your son lives with you." I would smile, because they didn't see what had changed. They didn't see the respect. They didn't see the balance. They didn't see the quiet justice of knowing my space mattered. I still cooked sometimes. I still helped. But now it was a choice, not an obligation. And the house felt like mine again, not because I claimed it loudly, but because I finally stood in it fully, with dignity, with calm, with the strength I didn't know I still had.